Alright, so I've uploaded quite a bit of content on the Catalan opening already. If you're new here, you might want to check out one of these videos before you watch this one, just so you know a little bit more about it, because this video we're going to be getting a little bit more into the weeds of how to actually go about playing the Catalan rather than like sort of understanding it. So you probably want to check out one of these videos. I recommend starting off with 20 ideas you must know. But the reason I'm uploading this video is because I've had quite a few comments recently about people like sort of saying stuff like this one guy in particular. He's like, I like the Catalan, but like, or maybe he didn't even say that. I'm not sure. Oh, it says at the end, still love the Catalan though. But yeah, he says, my problem with it, like the open Catalan, the bishop b4 check lines, I'll show that in the board soon. But this guy's saying, should I play the Catalan? Like there's some maybe transpositions that can happen because I played it ready first. This guy's saying down here, responding to another guy, like, don't play the Catalan. There's like 9 different ways they can keep the pawn after taking on c4. And that's assuming they play the move order this guy is talking about in this comment here. So yeah, move orders, very important if you're going to play the Catalan. In a lot of my videos, I've shown like one move order in particular, but there's quite a few different ones that you can play. So you can start off with 1 d4 to c4, sort of like a queen's gambit, and then play g3 on the 3rd or 4th move. You can play 1 d4 knight f3, 3 g3, delaying c4 a little bit. You can start with a ready move order. You can start with an English move order. And if you're a bit insane, you can play 1 g3. Be my guest. Yeah, I just want to go a bit into the pros and cons of each one. So 1 d4, 2 c4, and then we'll show it all on like a chessboard, and we'll get a bit more like showing what I'm talking about, right? But 1 d4, 2 c4, probably the most objectively challenging. Also, a lot of the sidelines that you can play against some of the like weird stuff that black can do. If you go d4, c4, it tends to be a little bit easier to punish. Problem is that compared to other ways of playing the Catalan, this might be the one that black players are best prepared for. They also get more options in certain lines. For example, open Catalan, that's one. And there's also, as a byproduct of going d4, c4, there's a lot of like these gambit lines that maybe you have to deal with, or just more direct stuff in general, like the Queen's Gambit accepted, the Budapest, the Alban. Not all of these are necessarily great, but it's more stuff you have to study. 1 d4, 2 knight f3, and then 3 g3. Pro of this is basically no one really properly studies like specifically this move order. Definitely at lower levels that's the case, at least like below 2000. Like, I mean, below 2000 there's not that many Catalan players, but even fewer are gonna play like this move order. Another pro is that it's very compact, or a lot more compact in terms of the number of lines you really need to study. One of the problems though is because you don't challenge the center as early with 2 c4, is that this also does give black a bit more flexibility in how they, because you're not going to be like, let's say d4, d5, right? If you play 2 c4, you're immediately going to be challenging their d5 pawn and be forcing them to do something about that. If you go 2 knight f3, obviously that's not doing that, and they get a little bit more, again, flexibility in how they can approach the position. And everything else, I'm just going to be boxing it into one group. I know, like, there's, of course, differences between all of them, but generally speaking, a lot of them reduce a lot of these annoying lines, like, again, like the open Catalan, a lot of, like, this Benoni stuff you could maybe be facing. That's just not going to happen if you go 1 knight f3, 1 c4. Again, can be good for, like, tricking people out of their usual lines. Again, I'll show more concretely what I may mean on the board soon. But a con with going like 1 knight f3 or 1 c4 is very often you're not going to end up where you actually want to, because like if you go c4 or e5, for example, I think I spat on my mic, but like say for example, someone goes d4, d5, c4, e6, and they go into like knight f3, knight f6, g3, and they go for like a proper Catalan, right? Well, that same person against like 1 c4, the English, might just go e5. They're not going to go e6, d5. They might, but maybe they won't, right? Like, because you play a flank opening, there's a much greater likelihood that they're just going to like play something completely independent. They're not going to let you try and transpose to another d4 opening. If you're not too sure what I'm talking about, again, we're going to show that on the board right now. So like the move order I've been showing in a lot of my videos, right, is like just going d4, c4. This is one that I've probably played the most. It's not the only one I've played, but it's probably what you could call the most professional move order, because it's the one that most like elite players are going to be playing when they enter the Catalan opening. But I was also talking about like you can go knight f3, g3, right? This also works against like some other setups like e6. You can also go like this, or g6. You can also do this, right? If they go c5, then you don't want to go g3 because then they take, and you want to go d5, right, against Benoni, like you would if you went d4, c4, right? You don't want to just let them take here. But I would argue actually the Benoni where the pawn's not yet on c4 is kind of difficult to play for black, so that's actually another pro for going for this move order. If you don't like the regular sort of Benonis where you have a pawn on c4, like these tend to be quite easy to play with knight c3, e4. But okay, the other move orders, right, like you could go knight f3, d5, g3, and then like eventually, let's say, transposed into a Catalan with c4, and you could go for a neo-Catalan with b3 and play it more like an English whatever, but you can also just transpose with d4, or like you could go immediately c4 and then go for like this. Also note you could play d4 earlier, but that's going to allow various things such as the lines mentioned earlier, the open Catalan with d takes c4. Bishop b4 check is another option. So usually if you don't play d4 at this point, like sorry, earlier on like move 1 or something, you're going to try and take advantage of that and try and make use of that flexibility to avoid a lot of those lines. Like, okay, bishop b4 obviously here looks kind of stupid. They can play d takes c4, but like these lines are completely different to a lot of the other open Catalan stuff yet, because we haven't yet put a pawn on d4. So it's like you have to study some extra stuff, but the argument would be that this extra stuff is going to be stuff that black is less familiar with compared to, like, let's say they play, where am I? So like, let's say here, the black is die hard. Like you're playing against someone who really plays d takes c4 against a Catalan, and they've studied like some lines super deeply or something. Well, if you go through like a ready move order, your argument would be basically that, okay, they can still play d takes c4, but they're going to know this a lot less well than they are going to know this, so therefore maybe this move order is a bit of a smarter try. There's also like d4 reverse Benoni. There's like a few extra options that you definitely give your opponent, but I'm bouncing around a little bit, so let's go back to the very start here. So d4 c4, right? And like it's the most principled because, you know, immediately you're forcing them to react to this somehow. Basically they're gonna play like either takes here, or maybe they're going to play some weird line like c5 with the Alban counter gambit, as I mentioned earlier. That's sort of one pro of going to knight f3, then g3. You do eliminate a lot of like random crap like the Alban, for example. You also don't face the queen's gambit accepted is another thing, for example, if you go knight f3, g3. But really the biggest con overall, I would say, is just the number of lines that you allow in the like proper Catalan, I guess you could say, like where they have like bishop b4 check. This is quite annoying for the idea that bishop d2, and I'm not going to take that. That's like, if to be honest, in low levels you see bishop b4 check quite a lot, but it's often like your opponent just taking on d2, trading off their like good bishop and helping develop your knight at the same time. So for a lot of you guys, if you see bishop b4 check, it's not your opponent being smart and then going like back to e7, provoking your bishop here, because in many lines, right, you want your knight on d2, but if you already spent a tempo putting your bishop there on that square, then there's a bit of conflict sort of going on. So there's also a bit of, you know, d takes e4, and you could play queen a4 check, but this line is not the most ambitious line in the world. It tends to allow black to equalize pretty easily with like just sort of playing like these moves, right, and then going for the c5 break. So that's why most people go for bishop g2 these days, and the problem with this is it gives a lot of, as we saw some from the comments, there's a lot of different ways black can play. Not all of them actually involve like really hanging on to dear life for this pawn, but there are some lines that can do that, like b5. There's knight c6, there's c5, there's bishop d7, c6, there's bishop b4 check, c5, a6, there's also knight d7, there's c6, so there's quite a few different moves, and to be honest, I have a pretty decent idea of what to do against all of them, just because I've been playing the Catalan for quite a few years now. But if you kind of think that's all a bit overwhelming and you can't really be bothered to study a lot of that, maybe the d4 c4 move order, and especially if you're just looking to get started with the Catalan, it's probably going to be a little bit overwhelming. Maybe you think like you could try that eventually, but I think a little bit of a softer entry, so to speak, into the Catalan would be to play this move order with knight to f3 and just going g3. Now, for example, if they go for like one of the e6 subs, notice that they can't take on c4 yet, and there's not really any bishop b4 check because you can just go c3 and like then go c4, and you basically just transpose to the bishop e7 lines. You haven't committed your bishop yet to d2. Bit of a weird way to get there, actually, to be honest, but this would essentially be the same as if they started with bishop e7, castle c4, and they still can take on c4, but these lines aren't like as sharp as the ones like if you just played c4 here generally, and well, it's only like one subset of the d takes c4 lines you really have to study. Well, there's a few different ones. For example, with queen c2, there's like maybe a6, which is by far the most popular. Sometimes people play b5, sometimes c6 as well, sometimes b6, but mostly a6, some b5, and very rarely you see these two as well. But with the main one, like a6, to be honest, like my opinion of these has always been that like it's not that fun of a line to really play for black. Like it's very difficult to actually win. White sort of has a nice like space advantage, and as long as you understand the general ideas, it's not like a super difficult position to play, in my opinion. And also because a lot of players, you know, haven't so diligently studied all the different move orders, you're going to be like probably tricking a lot of people out. Like they're expecting this to happen on the board, and then they have like their bishop b4 check line, their d takes e4 line, but when you play this, they don't get any of those things, and they might have to like improvise now or get tricked into like this line that, you know, they might not have studied so well, and then they might just end up going c6 for some closed Catalan stuff. I've talked a lot about the closed Catalan in my Catalan videos so far, like almost every single one I put out. I make sure to put at least one closed Catalan game just because I know at the club level how common this is. Like so many people haven't really even studied the proper Catalan that well, let alone like one of these sideline sort of move orders, right? And it's just so common for people, especially below like 2000 again. I think things are changing slightly, but still I think we're at a point where many people just don't really have that great of a grasp on how to really handle it. And by default, like if people haven't studied it before, they're not going to play d takes c4, they're probably just going to play like c6, and again some sort of closed Catalan. But okay, I'm rabbiting on here. What are the cons though of going, you know, for this move order? So one of the cons is that because we have not applied pressure yet to the d5 pawn, we kind of let black do that to us first with c5, sorry, c5, right? And after like bishop g2 takes, if we take, they get e5, and they get this very nice pawn center. So usually what we want to do is we want to play a slightly tricky move order with castles first, and wait for them to go like knight c6 before we take. And now when they go e5, we don't have to retreat, we can snap there, and we get a reverse Grunfeld. This is very nice, and I've had this a lot personally in my own games, like especially online playing this. And again, a lot of people here, I'm going to check the database, open this real quick, but yeah, I think I have this filtered to 16 to 2200 bullets, and you can see the overwhelming favorite here has been knight c6, but instead you see this move h6, slightly funny looking move, but the idea is just to wait a move, wait for knight takes d4, e5 again, but white can also wait a little bit with b3 and play this funny looking game here. But really, like, you know, so few people have even studied this to begin with, let alone this like perverted looking h6 move, right? So my point with this is that, you know, these annoying lines in the Catalan, people are more likely to have studied, whereas these annoying lines against the g3 move order, probably not as much, right? Which I think is a big pro for going for this move order, that like, okay, there's some stuff that you allow, but people tend to not know about it as much. So I guess there is also maybe one other drawback. I wouldn't say this is much these days, but a lot of Catalan players in the past, myself included, didn't like to go for like this sort of setup against the Slav with g3, because it was sort of considered for a long time that you don't really want to fianchetto your bishop and let them develop theirs so easily out. Like this is kind of just equal, and from a strategic point of view, that is sort of correct, but that's not as true these days. Also, bishop g4, like sort of similar idea, but these days that's not as big of a problem because people have realized that, like, I think here you don't want to play bishop g2 though. I think you want to play like c4 and then play knight to c3, e6, and knight h4. I think this is sort of a nice idea. You can also like play just bishop g2 though and play one of these lines of queen b3, but I think the very best way to play this these days is to go for knight h4 and try to win the bishop pair like this. And there's a few different lines they can play, like d takes c4, and there's this sort of line where you actually develop the bishop out this way. A lot of people though online, I think like bishop g6 is, yeah, again, quite popular, but this is quite easy to play. I think take I forget whether you go bishop g2 and let them take here. Let's see. So do you go queen d3 first? Yeah, I think you go queen d3 first. A lot of people forget about like black being able to take here, but I think this is a bit of a annoying move. So I'd recommend, yeah, queen d3 first, bishop g2, e4, and typical sort of Catalan play. So yeah, to be honest, I think this is probably the easiest move order to get started with the Catalan. The reason I'm not going to recommend something like one knight f3 or c4 is that, like, yeah, it's just, you're going to get so many games, right, where you're just going to get like one e5, and if you like this, okay, but if your idea is you want to sort of get into these Catalan positions, you're just going to have a large majority of your games where that's probably not going to be happening. Maybe one knight f3 is slightly better in that regard, because you prevent e5, and there's going to be a lot more people sort of playing more in the fashion of their normal d4 openings against the ready. And of course that can happen against the English as well. Like if someone's a Queen's Gambit decline player, they might play in the same way against the English, and then you can eventually transpose into your beloved Catalan, but they also might not, right? They might go e5, they might go c5, but again, you can see the appeal if someone's an open Catalan player. D takes c4 lines, I explained this a little bit earlier, of course, but they just don't quite hit the same. They're still like okay, but the positions have a very different feel to them. They're generally not sharp, they're a little bit more on the strategic side. And with knight f3 d5, you allow a lot of other stuff, like again, because you're not putting direct pressure on the like d5 pawn, they can even go g6, for example. They can go for any setup they want, like bishop g4, and even knight e7's a thing, for example. And then like if bishop g2, e5, and if you go d4, then they get this weird knight p6 lines. Just there's all this like weird stuff that you allow, which if you went d4 and move 1 wouldn't really happen. And not to mention if you're going for like c4 here, for example, you allow d4 and this sort of like reverse Benoni. And like there's a few different things you can do, right? b4's one of the sharpest lines, and against this f6 is sort of considered, I think, the main option. But there's even wacky stuff like g5 that black can do, and yeah, personally, never been a huge fan of this. It just not really my kind of chess, personally. So basically, again, yeah, d4, whatever they play, as long as they don't go like e5 or c5, or I mean, if they go b6, then you just occupy the whole center, right, and sort of play like that. But if they go for like d5 or knight f6, two most popular moves, then you just go knight f3 and then g3, right? I think this is, despite some of its drawbacks, probably the easiest way to get started with the Catalan opening. But anyways, that's going to be it for the video. If you want more help with your game with one-on-one coaching, I have a form in the description below which you can fill out. But for the rest of you, if you've enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe if you're not already, and anyways, I will see you until next time.